War just became a headline. At 1 p.m. Eastern, Rachel Maddow opens with a sentence that shouldn't exist. The United States has apparently started a war with Iran for some reason. Apparently, for some reason. That wording isn't style. It's a warning flare. The public was not given a clean chain of logic before the bombs. Then the contradiction hits. The president frames urgency. But his own Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, had just said on Wednesday in St. Kitts and Nevis, they are not enriching right now. If the nuclear clock isn't ticking, what exactly just triggered airstrikes? Maddow strips the first justification to the studs. Missile threat? Absolutely not. The U.S. is a whole continent away, meaning any strike on America would require an intercontinental ballistic missile. Does Iran have ICBMs? No, it does not. She adds there is no known evidence or even serious allegation that Iran is near developing that capability. That's the first missing pillar. Now, the second. Steve Witkoff, described as Trump's old real estate friend, claims Iran is a week away from industrial-grade uranium enrichment. A week, 7 days, a perfect panic headline. But Maddow says there's been no public evidence for it, and even the administration contradicts it. Rubio. They are not enriching right now. So the panic clock is marketing, not measurement. But here's the fracture in the story. Trump also insists that when he ordered bombing in June, it totally obliterated Iran's nuclear program. Totally obliterated. If it was erased, how is it suddenly back as an emergency that forces war today? Now personalize the stakes. This isn't a distant chess match. The decision lands on you because war isn't a tweet. It's budgets, risk, retaliation, attention, and consequence. And Maddow keeps one question in the center like a blade. If the reasons collapse on contact, why are we doing this? The official narrative keeps failing basic tests. Trump has suggested more than once that all he wants is for Iran to say the words that they are not pursuing a nuclear bomb, implying that if they just say it, the United States won't start a war. But the transcript states the Iranian government over and over again keeps saying that they are not developing a nuclear bomb. Over and over. The stated condition appears satisfied, and the outcome still becomes bombing. Now the pattern becomes visible. The trigger is not the trigger. But here's the fracture in the story. When the president defines the exit as a sentence, just say the words, he makes the war feel optional. And when Iran already says the words and the war happens anyway, you're forced to search for a different engine. Then the framing shifts. In that weird pre-recorded video message released at 2:30 in the morning, the president appears in a baseball hat and suit jacket and tells the people of Iran to rise up and overthrow their government. He calls on the Iranian police, the security forces, and the Revolutionary Guard to surrender and lay down their weapons. That's not defensive deterrence. That's regime change language. And this is where control starts slipping. Because if this is a regime change war, then the scale is not a strike. The scale is a collapse attempt. Iran is 92 million people, more than triple the population of Iraq or Afghanistan when the U.S. launched those disastrous regime change wars 2 decades ago. That number isn't trivia, it's gravity. Now comes the first evidence strike. Maddow points to what's absent. If you truly wanted the Iranian people to organize quickly, you'd enable communication. But the transcript says the internet is off in Iran. In a country under bombardment, a blackout isn't a detail. It's a limiter. Maddow says if the U.S. genuinely wanted people to rise up, it might have taken steps to turn the internet back on so people could reach each other and the world could reach them. Instead, she says the administration gutted the crucial Farsi language Voice of America communications platform and put it in the hands of a soft focus election denier local news anchor. That's not an uprising toolkit. That's a dismantling of outreach. Notice what they never addressed. If you call on armed forces to surrender, where is the mechanism? Where is the path? Maddow says Trump gave some instructions on how to surrender and lay down their weapons. None. No steps, no terms, just a demand. Demands without routes don't create peaceful transitions, they create chaos. And then Maddow adds a cold reality check. The Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps has massive economic interests and a huge hold on multiple sectors of the Iranian economy. That means it's not a single man you remove and the system go poof. It's embedded power. That makes regime change harder, longer, and messier. Now the normalization shift. War becomes a habit. The transcript says this is the 7th country Trump has bombed since returning to office for 1 year. 7 in 1 year. That's not an emergency response posture. That's repetition. And the New York Times editorial board is quoted, "In this second term, Trump's appetite for military intervention grows with the eating." Appetite, not duty, not necessity, appetite. And here's the cognitive pivot. War is also described as a unilateral toy. Maddow says there's no question he would seek a declaration of war from Congress or even an authorization for the use of military force. She frames it as something he believes he can do alone, in a baseball hat from home. That's a governance shift, from deliberation to impulse, from institution to personality. Now watch the way the story tries to sell moral urgency. Maddow asks, almost daring the viewer to believe it, is this because Trump's heart bleeds for Iranian protesters killed in January and February of this year? Is it because he passionately supports free speech and the right to protest? Her tone is sharp because the claim doesn't match the record she's describing. If it were about supporting the Iranian people, she says, we might actually be supporting the Iranian people. But the operational steps she lists do the opposite. Now comes the second evidence strike, heavier than the first. Cui bono? Who benefits? Maddow names Iran's perennial rivals and enemies, the Gulf Arab states, including Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. Then she anchors it with numbers and objects. Qatar, she says, just gave Donald Trump a $400 million plane, a gilded flying palace, for his own use during the presidency, and as she describes it, even after he leaves office. The UAE, she says, structured a totally pointless crypto financial transaction so that $2 billion would be stuffed into the Trump family's new crypto firm. And the Saudis, she says, stuffed another $2 billion into Jared Kushner's pockets as Trump's first term ended. Now look at the gap between words and actions. At the time, she notes, the Trump camp offered an explanation. Don't worry, Jared will never again work for the U.S. government. He's never coming back to Washington, so there's no conflict. But then Maddow drops the pivot. Who was leading negotiations with Iran on behalf of the United States government before we just started this war with them today? Not Rubio, he was in St. Kitts. She says it was Jared Kushner sitting alongside Steve Witkoff, who had been seeking money from Qatar's sovereign wealth fund. That's not a rumor in the transcript. That's the described personnel. And this is the moment it stops being isolated. The same regional actors who benefit from Iran being weakened are the ones described as pouring astonishing cash into the president's orbit. Then the U.S. military begins a war that, in Maddow's framing, they want, and the American people do not, with an explanation that isn't internally consistent, let alone rational. Maddow uses an analogy to make the mechanism feel physical, a neighbor dispute. Then the cops break down your door, arrest your family, ransack your house, light a fire, bulldoze it, and then tell your neighbor, it's all done. You can take his backyard and house. Later, you learn the neighbor has been paying massive bribes to the police. That's the shape she's suggesting. Enforcement power rented for someone else's benefit. Now the pressure cascade. Stack the developments fast. Airstrikes begin while the internet is off in Iran. Reports of damage come from Tehran and elsewhere in Iran. The president speaks through a 2:30 a.m. recording. The U.S. has already bombed 7 countries in a year, and the public still doesn't have a consistent rationale. No ICBM threat, no active enrichment, no sudden breakthrough to justify urgency, and a claimed prior obliteration that supposedly removed the danger. What happens if this doesn't slow down? Now bring it to the viewer. You don't need ideology to feel the consequences of unstable escalation. A regime change war doesn't stay in a studio sentence. It becomes risk, uncertainty, and the possibility of widening conflict. Maddow describes Iran as huge and complex, with massive, suffocating, brutal domestic security services that terrorize people in the best and the worst of times, and have done so in the last 8 weeks. When you strike a system like that, the first outcome is not clean reform, it's collision. If this feels close to home, say that in the comments. Because the mechanism in the transcript is bigger than one strike. It's how decisions get made when appetite, attention, and money align. Maddow calls war the world's greatest change of subject. She says starting a war gets him a ton of attention. He gets to do it unilaterally, he contends. It is exciting, controversial, centered on him. Now, step above it, here's the structural insight delivered calmly. You don't need complex conspiracies when incentives already line up. If the declared threats are weak, but the benefits to certain rivals are strong, and those rivals are described as transferring extraordinary sums into the president's orbit, then the system becomes vulnerable to alignment. Alignment is quieter than ideology. It doesn't shout, it moves. Now the trajectory window. One path is hardening escalation, repeated strikes, a reinforced appetite, an expanding precedent. Another path is destabilization without succession. Maddow notes there's no vice Ayatollah who just steps in, no simple replacement, no clean handoff. If leadership is targeted, the outcomes become unpredictable and embedded power structures don't evaporate. Avoid certainty, but don't ignore velocity. Maddow points out Trump, as a private citizen, repeatedly claimed in 2011, 2012, and 2013 that Obama would start a war with Iran for political advantage. Obama didn't, but Trump said why he thought it would work. Now, as the transcript says, he faces domestic political disaster in this year's elections. He starts that war himself. The pattern doesn't prove motive, it reveals possibility under pressure. And now the reframe that loops the mind. When reasons collapse, incentives remain. The missile threat is denied. Does Iran have ICBMs? No, it does not. The enrichment urgency is denied. They are not enriching right now. The moral uprising frame is undermined by blackouts, gutted communications, and no surrender pathway. What remains are the benefits to rivals, the money described in exact numbers, the appetite for intervention, and the unilateral style of execution. So remember this sentence. This wasn't sold as a war of necessity. It was executed like a war of alignment. If you want to track what happens next, who responds, who profits, who reframes, subscribe. Because the next escalation won't arrive labeled as escalation. It will arrive labeled as rescue. And by the time the label lands, the velocity may already be irreversible.